4-year-old orphan boy is humiliated in a luxury restaurant and forced to eat scraps. But a billionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Please comment. With a rating from 0 to 10 for my story, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. The thin morning rain turned the sidewalks of the sprawling metropolis into dark mirrors as the 4-year-old orphan boy shuffled through the streets, searching for any crumb of hope. His tattered clothes clung to his thin body, and his bare feet left small streaks of blood on the icy concrete. He hadn't tasted anything but dirty gutter water for 3 days, and hunger had become a constant companion, gnawing at his stomach mercilessly. The aroma emanating from the most upscale restaurant in the area hit him like a sweet and cruel blow. Through the gleaming windows, he could see entire families savoring dishes that looked like works of art, laughter echoing between tables covered with spotless white linens. His eyes filled with tears as he watched a child his own age rejecting half a plate that could have fed him for an entire week. Desperation made him ignore all the risks. He slipped through a side door that had been left ajar when an employee went out for a smoke break, hiding behind a marble column that supported the ornate ceiling. The contrast between his wretched appearance and the elegant ambience was stark. Every detail of the establishment screamed wealth and exclusivity, from the crystal chandeliers to the golden silverware gleaming under the soft light. The cruel manager, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a smile that never reached his heart, noticed the unwanted presence almost immediately. His reputation for intolerance towards vulnerable people was known throughout the area. He had thrown out dozens of needy individuals over the years, always with the same sadistic pleasure etched on his face. "Well, look what we have here," he announced loudly, making sure to draw the attention of all the patrons. "A little intruder has decided to grace us with his presence." The boy tried to hide better, but it was already too late. 2 security guards dragged him to the center of the main dining room, where all conversations ceased instantly. The heavy silence was broken only by the sound of expensive shoes tapping on the marble floor as the customers turned to watch the spectacle that was about to unfold. "Since you've come here looking for food," the manager said with calculated cruelty, "we'll give you exactly what you deserve." He ordered the staff to bring the leftover food that had been left on the patrons' plates: half-chewed pieces of meat, wilted salad, spilled sauces mixed with breadcrumbs. Everything was dumped on the floor, right in front of the starving child, while dozens of people silently watched the public humiliation. "Eat," the manager ordered, crossing his arms with satisfaction. "This is what kids like you deserve." The boy looked at the food scattered on the floor, then at all the faces watching him. Some patrons averted their gaze in discomfort, others whispered among themselves, but no one spoke out to defend the helpless child. The hunger was so overwhelming that he began to crouch down, his hands trembling with shame and need. It was then that a firm voice cut through the heavy air of the restaurant. "Stop this immediately!" Everyone turned to see who had dared to break the complicit silence. In the most secluded corner of the room, a stunning 30-year-old woman slowly rose from her table. Her appearance was that of a movie star: perfectly styled hair, elegant clothes that cost more than most people earned in a year, and a posture that radiated confidence and power. The billionaire heiress had been watching the entire scene, with her heart breaking in silence. Something in the boy's vulnerability had touched a deep wound in her soul, a pain that she had carried for years and had never been able to fully heal. Seeing that child being humiliated awakened a fury in her that she didn't even know she still possessed. "What kind of establishment is this that amuses itself by torturing children?" she questioned, walking towards the center of the room. Her voice echoed with authority, causing the manager to recoil instinctively. "Madam, this is not your concern," the man tried to reply, but his voice faltered slightly before the woman's imposing presence. "It becomes my concern the moment I decide it is," she retorted, pulling a leather wallet from her purse. "How much does it cost to feed this child properly?" The manager, sensing an opportunity for profit, mustered his most fake smile. "Well, our simplest children's menu costs—" "I don't care about the price," she interrupted, placing several bills on the nearest table. "I want you to prepare the best meal this establishment offers, and I want it served with the same respect you would give any other customer." The boy looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and distrust. He had learned on the streets that the kindness of adults always came with a price, and his life experience had already taught him to question everyone's intentions. But something in that woman's eyes was different. There was a familiar pain there, an understanding that transcended words. While they waited for the meal to arrive, the billionaire knelt beside the boy, completely ignoring the fact that her expensive dress was touching the dirty floor of the restaurant. "What's your name?" she asked gently. The child hesitated for a long moment before whispering an almost inaudible answer. His large, dark eyes revealed an impressive intelligence for someone so young, but they also carried the weight of traumas that no child should know. It was then that the first major revelation of the day occurred. As they talked, the billionaire noticed a small logo embroidered on the wall of the restaurant, a symbol she knew very well. Her blood ran cold when she recognized the mark of the rival family that had destroyed her family's empire decades ago through questionable business practices and market manipulation. Without realizing it, she had been funding her own enemies for months, regularly frequenting that establishment and contributing to the success of people who had caused her family's ruin. The discovery was like a punch to the gut, but it also ignited a fierce determination in her heart. The dish finally arrived, a culinary masterpiece that made the boy's eyes shine with admiration. As he ate slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the last meal of his life, the billionaire watched every movement, every expression of genuine pleasure that illuminated the child's face. "You're very smart," she commented, noticing how the boy paid attention to everything around him, absorbing conversations and details with an extraordinary observational ability. During the meal, the boy demonstrated an astonishing ability to memorize and repeat entire conversations that he had overheard between wealthy customers during his previous attempts to get food. He revealed business secrets, details of confidential deals, and information that could be worth millions in the right hands. The billionaire realized that she had found much more than a child in need. She had discovered someone with extraordinary potential, an intelligence that could be shaped and developed if given the right opportunities. But she also knew that this natural talent could be exploited by unscrupulous people if she didn't act quickly. When they finished, she prepared to leave, but the boy held her hand with surprising strength for someone so frail. "Will you come back?" he asked with a vulnerability that broke the woman's heart. Before she could answer, the manager approached with a smile that couldn't completely hide the malice in his eyes. "It was very generous of you to help the child," he said, but there was something in his tone that made the billionaire feel uncomfortable. "I hope we can see you again soon." There was a veiled threat in those words, a suggestion that this meeting had sparked consequences that she didn't yet fully understand. As she left the restaurant with the boy at her side, the billionaire couldn't shake the feeling that she had just become involved in something much bigger and more dangerous than she had imagined. The days that followed the meeting at the restaurant transformed the billionaire's life in ways she never could have predicted. The boy had been taken to a temporary shelter by social services, but the image of his intelligent and haunted eyes wouldn't leave her mind. She knew she needed to act, but she also understood that any hasty move could put the child in even greater danger. For 2 weeks, she discreetly investigated the city's child protection system, discovering a reality much darker than she had imagined. Official reports painted an optimistic picture of care and dedication, but the truth behind closed doors was completely different. Resources earmarked for children disappeared mysteriously, while those in charge lived in luxurious homes and drove imported cars. The decision to disguise herself as an ordinary person came naturally. She abandoned her designer clothes, hid her expensive jewelry, and assumed the identity of a volunteer interested in helping children in need. The contrast was shocking. The woman who used to run business meetings and make decisions that moved millions now presented herself as someone simple, willing to donate her time for a noble cause. The shelter where the boy had been placed was located in a peripheral area of the city, a grey building that had seen better days. Paint peeled off the walls, windows were cracked, and a musty smell hung in the air. The first impression was devastating. This was far from the minimum standards of care that any child deserved. The director of the shelter was a robust woman in her 50s who spoke with an exaggerated sweetness whenever there were visitors, but whose eyes revealed a calculating coldness. She greeted the new volunteer with suspicious enthusiasm, making sure to show only the most presentable areas of the establishment. "We are very happy to welcome people willing to help," said the director, leading her down a narrow corridor. "Our children need a lot of affection and special attention." What the billionaire saw in the following days left her deeply disturbed. The children received meager and low-quality meals, slept in old beds with torn mattresses, and spent most of their time in monotonous activities that seemed more like a way to keep them quiet than to promote their development. The boy from the restaurant was among them, but there was something different about his demeanor. While the other children seemed resigned to the situation, he observed everything with intense attention, as if cataloguing every injustice, every act of neglect. When she finally managed to talk to him alone, she discovered that his perception of reality was even sharper than she had imagined. "They lie all the time," whispered the child, looking around to make sure no one was listening. "They say the money's gone, but yesterday I saw the director putting bills in a hidden box." The revelation confirmed the billionaire's suspicions, but it also revealed that the boy was taking unnecessary risks by observing the adults so closely. His natural intelligence made him too dangerous a witness to people who profited from the misery of others. During the following weeks, she developed a careful routine. She arrived at the shelter in the early afternoon, helped with basic activities, and, whenever possible, talked to the boy about seemingly innocent subjects. Slowly, the child began to trust her, revealing disturbing details about his life before the shelter. He had lost his parents when he was only 2 years old, in a tragedy that he still couldn't fully understand. Since then, he had gone through different institutions, each worse than the last, until he ended up living on the streets on his own. His survival skills were impressive for someone so young, but it had cost him his childhood and his trust in adults. "My mom always said I was special," he said one rainy afternoon as they drew together. "She said I could see things that other people couldn't." The billionaire realized that he wasn't just referring to the ability to observe physical details, but to something much deeper. The boy could read people's intentions through subtle gestures, facial expressions, and tones of voice. It was a skill he had developed out of necessity, but it could be extraordinarily valuable if refined properly. It was during one of these conversations that she discovered the most shocking connection of all. The boy casually mentioned that his parents worked in a factory that had suddenly closed, leaving hundreds of families without a livelihood. When he described the location and characteristics of the establishment, the billionaire's blood ran cold. She immediately recognized the description. That factory had been closed after a complex financial maneuver orchestrated by her own investment firm. At the time, it seemed like just another profitable deal, buying undervalued shares, restructuring the operation, and selling the land for real estate development. She had never thought about the families that would be destroyed in the process. The discovery hit her like a high-speed train. Unknowingly, she had been responsible for the destruction of the boy's family, creating the circumstances that led him to live on the streets and suffer all the subsequent humiliations. The guilt she felt was devastating, a pain that threatened to consume her sanity and question every business decision she had made over the years. That night, she cried for the first time in decades. Sitting in the office of her mansion, surrounded by symbols of her wealth and success, she realized that she had become exactly the kind of person she despised, someone who prioritized profits above human lives. The revelation also explained why she had felt so connected to the boy from the first moment. It was as if her subconscious recognized a responsibility that her conscious mind had not yet processed. Now that she knew the truth, there was no possibility of simply moving on. She needed to find a way to repair the damage she had caused. The decision to officially adopt the child seemed like the obvious answer, but she soon discovered that the path would be much more complicated than she had imagined. The legal system was filled with unnecessary bureaucracy and officials who seemed more interested in creating obstacles than in helping children in need. Her personal lawyer, a distinguished man who had represented her family for more than a decade, seemed strangely reluctant to speed up the process. Every time she pushed for faster results, he invented new legal complications and additional requirements that indefinitely prolonged the proceedings. "These cases require a lot of care," he explained with a condescending smile. "We cannot rush into such delicate matters. The child's well-being must be our absolute priority." But there was something in his eyes that did not match his words. The billionaire began to suspect that he was deliberately sabotaging her efforts, although she couldn't understand the reasons behind such a betrayal. Meanwhile, the situation at the shelter continued to deteriorate. The boy reported that several children had disappeared during the night, taken away by unknown adults who arrived in dark cars and spoke in whispers with the director. When questioned about the fate of these children, the woman always gave vague explanations about foster families who preferred to maintain privacy. The discovery that children were being secretly removed from the shelter set off alarm bells in the billionaire's mind. She knew she needed to act quickly to protect the boy, but she also understood that any hasty move could put him in even greater danger. It was then that she decided to take a drastic measure. Using her business contacts, she gained access to financial information that revealed huge discrepancies between the resources received by the shelter and the expenses reported officially. Thousands of dollars disappeared monthly, while the children lived in increasingly precarious conditions. The investigation revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond the shelter. Public officials, lawyers, and even judges were involved in a complex scheme that kept orphan children in a vulnerable situation so that those responsible could continue receiving government funds without providing adequate care. When she confronted her lawyer with these findings, his reaction confirmed her worst suspicions. The man she had entrusted with her most important affairs was selling information about her adoption attempts to the criminals, allowing them to prepare for any legal action she might take. The betrayal was a devastating blow, but it also freed her from any hesitation about the methods she would need to use. If the system was corrupt from the ground up, she would have to find alternative ways to protect the boy and expose the truth. On the night she made this decision, she received an anonymous call that made her blood run cold. "Stop meddling where you don't belong," said a distorted voice, "or the child you are trying to save may simply disappear like so many others." The threatening phone call echoed in the billionaire's mind throughout the sleepless night that followed. Every shadow in her mansion seemed to hide invisible dangers. Every noise made her jump in fright. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly vulnerable, but not for herself. The concern that consumed her was entirely focused on the safety of the boy who had become the center of her world. The next morning, she arrived at the shelter earlier than usual, feigning normalcy while her heart beat wildly. The boy greeted her with the shy smile that had become her source of strength, but she immediately noticed that something was different. There were red marks on his small arms, and he limped slightly as he walked. "What happened to you?" she asked discreetly when they managed to be alone. The child looked around nervously before whispering his answer. "The director said I was asking too many questions. The children who are too curious sometimes get hurt." The fury that took over the billionaire was so intense that she had to restrain herself from confronting the director immediately. Instead, she forced herself to remain calm and develop a more careful plan. She knew that an emotional outburst would only put the boy in even greater danger. During the following days, she became an even more attentive observer, documenting every irregularity she could identify. Hook, 4-year-old orphan boy, is humiliated in a luxury restaurant and forced to eat scraps. But a billionaire saw everything and did something that shocked everyone. Please comment with a rating from 0 to 10 for my story. Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I count on your help. She discovered that the pattern of child disappearances followed a disturbing logic. Always the most intelligent ones, those who asked questions or showed any kind of resistance to the system. The boy, sensing the growing tension around him, began to show worrying signs of psychological trauma. He had constant nightmares, startled at sudden noises, and developed a nervous habit of constantly checking to see if anyone was watching him. The constant pressure was taking a devastating toll on his mental health. "Sometimes I dream that I'm running," he said one particularly difficult afternoon. "But no matter how much I run, I can never escape the voices calling me." The billionaire realized that she was putting the child in an impossible situation by involving him in her investigation of corruption. Each piece of information he collected, each observation he made, increased the risk of retaliation. She began to question whether she was really trying to save him or just using him for her own purposes of revenge. It was during this crisis of conscience that she received an unexpected visit at her mansion. An elegant, middle-aged man introduced himself as a private investigator, claiming to have important information about the case she was investigating. His impeccable appearance and refined manners contrasted with the urgency in his voice. "I know you're trying to adopt a specific child," he said, sitting down in the living room uninvited. "I also know that you've discovered some irregularities in the system. What you may not know is that you're dealing with people much more dangerous than you imagine." He revealed that the network of corruption involving orphan children extended throughout the region, moving impressive amounts of money through a complex system of diverting public funds. Those responsible would not hesitate to eliminate any threat to their profits, even if it meant harming innocent children. "The boy you're trying to protect has discovered things that could destroy very powerful people," the investigator continued. "His ability to memorize conversations and observe details makes him an extremely dangerous witness. There are people willing to do anything to silence him permanently." The revelation confirmed the billionaire's worst fears, but it also gave her a clearer perspective of the magnitude of the problem she faced. She wasn't just fighting corrupt shelter employees. She was confronting a criminal organization that had turned child suffering into a source of income. The investigator offered to help her, but his conditions were concerning. He wanted complete access to her financial resources and total control over the investigation strategy. Something in his eyes made her hesitate. There was a disturbing familiarity that she couldn't identify. That same night, she decided to conduct her own investigation into the man who had appeared at her door. Using resources she had learned to employ discreetly over the previous weeks, she discovered that he wasn't who he claimed to be. His credentials were fake, his office was non-existent, and his references led to disconnected numbers. The discovery terrified her. If criminals were approaching her disguised as allies, it meant that they had already identified her activities and were trying to control her from within. Every person she trusted could be a potential enemy. Every offer of help could be a trap. The paranoia that followed almost drove her to madness. She stopped trusting her household staff, changed all the locks on her house, and hired a completely new security system. But she knew that no protective measure would be enough if she continued visiting the shelter regularly. It was then that she made the most difficult decision of her life. She needed to remove the boy from that environment immediately, even if it meant acting outside the law. She could no longer bear to see him suffering while corrupt bureaucracies prevented his official adoption. She developed a meticulous plan over several sleepless nights. She would use her resources to create a temporary identity for the child, taking him to a safe location while continuing to fight legally for official custody. It was risky and potentially illegal, but it seemed like the only option that would guarantee the boy's immediate safety. On the eve of the execution of her plan, something happened that changed everything. The boy managed to access the director's office during the night when she was absent and discovered documents that revealed the true extent of the criminal operation. Dozens of children had been transferred to fictitious families, while the money intended for their care continued to be received by those responsible. Even more disturbing was the discovery that some of these children were being forced to work in deplorable conditions, while others simply disappeared without a trace. The shelter was not just a place of neglect, it was the center of a child exploitation operation. The boy memorized names, dates, and values with his characteristic precision, but the discovery left him so traumatized that he began to have panic attacks. When the billionaire arrived the next day, she found him hiding in a corner, trembling and whispering numbers and names repeatedly. "They're going to do to me what they did to the others," he repeated between sobs. "I know too much. I've seen too much." The urgency of the situation became unbearable. The billionaire knew she had only hours, maybe minutes, before someone discovered that the boy had accessed confidential information. Every second of hesitation could cost the life of the child who had become more important to her than her own existence. It was then that she decided to drastically accelerate her rescue plan. Feigning a normal farewell at the end of the day, she left the shelter but remained hidden in the surrounding area, awaiting the ideal moment to act. She knew she had only one chance. If she failed, both she and the boy would pay a terrible price. At 2 a.m, when the shelter was plunged into silence, she returned using a secondary entrance that she had identified during her observations. Her footsteps echoed softly in the dark corridors as she made her way to the dormitory where the boy should have been sleeping. But when she arrived, she found only an empty and disheveled bed. A window was ajar, swaying slightly in the night breeze. On the pillow, there was a note written in childish handwriting that made her heart stop. "They came to get me. Thank you for trying to save me." The despair that took over the billionaire at that moment was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She held the note with trembling hands, reading and rereading the words written by the child who had become her reason for living. Guilt crushed her like an avalanche. If she had acted more quickly, if she hadn't hesitated so much, perhaps she could have prevented that tragedy. During the 3 days that followed, she transformed into an unrecognizable person. She completely abandoned her business commitments and dedicated every waking minute to searching for clues about the boy's whereabouts. She hired private investigators, offered hefty rewards for information, and even considered involving the media, but she knew that any public exposure could put the child in even greater danger. It was during a desperate search through the city's most dangerous neighborhoods that she received a call that changed everything. The voice on the other end of the line was familiar, but it took a few seconds to recognize it. It was her former driver, an honest man who had worked for her family for decades before retiring. "Madam, I can't talk much on the phone," he whispered nervously. "But I know where the boy is. Meet me at the old family warehouse, the one your father used before building the empire." Come alone and bring money, a lot of money. The warehouse was located in an abandoned industrial area, a place she hadn't visited in over 15 years. She drove there with her heart pounding, carrying a briefcase with all the cash she had managed to gather quickly. The concrete structure was covered in graffiti and surrounded by vacant lots, but something in the familiarity of the place reassured her slightly. When she arrived, she found not only her former driver, but also 3 other people she recognized immediately, former employees of the child protection system who had been fired in recent months for questioning inappropriate procedures. They all had tense expressions, but there was a genuine determination in their eyes that made her recover some of her lost hope. "We were also investigating the corruption on our own," explained a 50-year-old woman who had been the adoption supervisor for over 2 decades. "When we discovered that you were in danger, we decided to act. The boy is safe, but the situation is much more complicated than you imagine." They revealed that they had been observing the shelter for weeks, documenting the irregularities and creating evidence that could be used to expose the entire criminal network. On the night the boy disappeared, one of the former employees was watching the location and saw when unknown men arrived to take him. Instead of allowing this to happen, they intervened at the last moment. "It was a risky operation," admitted the former driver. "We had to simulate the kidnapping to deceive the criminals, making them believe that they had managed to silence the child. Meanwhile, we hid the boy in a place where he would be truly protected. The revelation was like a miracle for the billionaire, but the joy was tempered by the understanding that the situation was still far from resolved. The criminals were still free, other children were still in danger, and the boy could not remain hidden indefinitely." "Where is he?" she asked urgently. "Safe," replied the former supervisor, "but before bringing you together, we need to finish what we started. We have enough evidence to destroy the entire operation, but we need your help to implement the final plan." During the following hours, they revealed the true extent of their discoveries. The corruption network was not just local. It extended through several cities in the region, involving high-ranking public officials and respected businessmen who used their influence to protect the criminal operation. The most shocking thing was discovering that the cruel manager of the restaurant, where everything had started, was actually the coordinator of the entire network. He used the luxurious establishment as a front to launder money diverted from the resources intended for orphan children, and had recognized the boy's potential intelligence from the first meeting. "He was planning to use the child as a kind of spy," explained one of the former employees. "Intelligent children were valuable to them. They could be trained to collect information in places where adults would not have access. When he realized that you were interfering, he decided that the boy had become a risk that needed to be eliminated." The discovery that she had been so close to the leader of the criminal operation from the beginning was devastating, but it also revealed an opportunity. If they could gather enough evidence against the manager, they could dismantle the entire network at once. The plan they developed in the following weeks was meticulous and risky. The billionaire would use her influence to organize a business meeting at the restaurant, attracting several of those involved in the operation to a location where they could be recorded discussing their crimes. Meanwhile, the former employees would present their evidence to the honest authorities they had identified during their investigation. During this period, she was finally reunited with the boy in a safe location on the outskirts of the city. The reunion was emotional and revealed how both had grown and transformed during those challenging months. The child had developed an impressive maturity, but had also maintained his extraordinary intelligence and his ability to perceive details that escaped adults. "I knew you would come looking for me," he said with a smile that lit up the billionaire's entire face. "I could see in your eyes that you would never give up on me." In the days leading up to the final operation, they spent time together for the first time without the constant pressure of imminent danger. The billionaire discovered aspects of the boy's personality that had been suppressed by trauma and the need for survival. He was curious about everything, asked intelligent questions about the world around him, and demonstrated a natural empathy for the feelings of others. "When this is all over," he asked one sunny afternoon, "are we going to be a real family?" The question touched a deep wound that the billionaire had carried for years. She had never talked about the child she had lost, about the pain that had hardened her and led her to focus exclusively on business. But now, looking at that courageous child who had faced so many challenges, she realized that she had found a second chance to be the mother she had always wanted to be. "Yes," she replied with tears in her eyes, "we're going to be a family." The final operation took place on a rainy Tuesday night. Everything went as planned. The manager and his associates were recorded discussing incriminating details of their activities, while the authorities simultaneously raided the shelter and other locations related to the operation. Dozens of people were arrested, documents were seized, and more importantly, dozens of children were rescued from situations of exploitation. The trial that followed in the weeks that followed exposed the true magnitude of the corruption and resulted in severe convictions for all those involved. The billionaire used her influence and resources to ensure that the rescued children received adequate care and opportunities for recovery. More importantly, her adoption of the boy was finally approved by an honest judge who recognized the genuine connection between them. The legal process that had been sabotaged for months was completed in a matter of days when the corrupt obstacles were removed. 6 months later, in her mansion transformed into a real home, the billionaire watched the boy playing in the garden that had been redesigned especially for him. His laughter echoed through the air, replacing the somber silence that had dominated that house for years. She had used part of her fortune to create a legitimate child protection foundation, ensuring that other children would not go through the suffering they had faced. The boy, now officially her son, demonstrated daily that his extraordinary intelligence combined with love and proper care could result in unlimited potential. "Mom," he called her from the garden, using the word that had become music to her ears. "Can you come play with me?" She smiled, putting away the business documents that no longer seemed so important, and ran to join him under the golden afternoon sun. For the first time in her adult life, she had found something more valuable than all the money in the world. A family built not by blood or inheritance, but by choice, sacrifice, and true love. The orphan boy, who had entered her life through a public humiliation, had become her salvation, teaching her that true wealth was not in the assets and investments she had accumulated, but in the ability to make a difference in someone else's life. Together, they had overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable and built a future based on hope, justice, and unconditional love. If you like this wonderful story, please comment with a rating from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important, and if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.